Okay, Gara, I've hit the record button. Gara, I think you're still on mute.
That makes it an official workshop. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Gara Lloyd-Lester. I'm the Director of Community and Coalition Initiatives at the Suicide Prevention Center of New York State. We're pleased to be able to bring you the workshop this afternoon and to have Bruce Swingle and Joe Hunter from the VA as our presenters. So we've got a lot of information to share. So I want to begin with introductions and just a reminder that we will be sending a link and a PDF of the slide deck afterwards and have it posted on our website for folks if they want to get a chance to review it. We also encourage people to use the chat function if any questions come up throughout the course of the workshop, as well as to share information or resources. We have a large group of folks on the call today, so there's an opportunity certainly to share your own experiences and information and resources as we go through the workshop. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce, beginning with Bruce Swingle. And Reverend Dr. Bruce Swingle has been serving as the lead chaplain at the Stratton VA Medical Center since 2007. In 2012, he received a Doctor of Ministry degree with a focus on scripture, spirituality, and leadership from Northeastern Seminary in Rochester, New York. He's completed 4 units of clinical pastoral counseling and is a board certified chaplain through the Association of Professional Chaplains. In 2016, Chaplain Swingle completed a 12-month training through the Veterans Administration on mental health integration in chaplain service. And in 2020, he completed an 18-month training program through the Veterans Administration Dynamic Diffusion Network. He's an ordained elder and an endorsed chaplain through the Free Methodist Church USA. His work experience includes years of pastoral ministry as a local pastor and as a chaplain with St. Peter's Hospital in Albany, the Community Hospice of Amsterdam, and the VA Medical Centers in Canandaigua and Bath, New York. And presenting with Reverend Swingle is Joseph Hunter. Dr. Hunter's education includes a bachelor's degree in psychology from Lemoyne College, master's and doctoral degrees in social work, both from the State University of New York at Albany. Dr. Hunter completed postdoctoral training as a VA and Hartford geriatric social worker scholar while at the Stratton VA Medical Center and was recognized as a VA Gold Status Fellow in 2017 for a nationally recognized innovation in suicide prevention, Cultivating Hope in Caring Communities, which is the title of the workshop that we'll be participating in this afternoon. He's been worked at the Stratton VA Medical Center in Albany for the past 13 and a half years and serves as the local VA suicide prevention coordinator. In addition, Dr. Hunter joined the University of Southern California School of Social Work as a part-time adjunct lecturer in 2013 and serves as an adjunct assistant professor at USC's Master of Social Work courses. Dr. Hunter also provides educational programming for the National Association of Social Workers, and independently from these others, he recently published his first manuscript addressing his self-preservation theory, which he presented on last year, actually for this group. And so with that, I am pleased to turn things over to Dr. Hunter.
Thanks, Gara. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'll just give you a minute to pull my screen up here and share with you the slides, share with you all the slides, I should say. All right. So the title of this presentation is Cultivating Hope in Caring Communities, and I appreciate the introduction. As a result of this training, hopefully you all will understand the problem of suicide among military veterans and the service member population. You'll learn how naturally existing caring community organizations and leaders can be engaged and empowered to take action for suicide prevention. You're going to learn an upstream approach to suicide and gun violence prevention. learn a specific set of steps to engage a concerned veteran in a discussion about his or her mental health that leads to a referral to care, and become armed with knowledge, tools, and confidence to reach new audiences within respective communities to further this initiative. Okay. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about suicide in the military service member and veteran population. This presentation in of itself could easily be hours long. Obviously, we're not going to spend that much time on that, but I'm going to highlight some key points here, starting with just generally suicide in the US. Let me see if I can clear up my screen a little bit. It's interesting to note that the homicide death in the US is around 18,000 versus the suicide rate is 2.6 times that at over 47,500 at last count. One of the points that I'd like to make here, and you'll hear me make again and again, is that a large proportion of gun-related deaths in our country are suicides. Over 60% actually are suicides. And provisional data indicate that suicide deaths dropped 5.6% in the last year, which is really the first time we've seen a drop. But then I also wonder if this is the calm before the storm. So unfortunately that could be the case. But anytime we see a change like that, you know, it's I don't know, I would say a little exciting. It's also important to note that 46% of people who died by suicide had a known mental health condition, and 90% had shown symptoms of a mental health condition. As far as veterans go, there are about 130 US suicides every day. And of those, a little over 17 and a half are military veterans and about one active duty service member on a daily basis. In 2018, firearms were the method of suicide in 69.4% of male veteran suicide deaths and about 42% of female veteran suicide deaths. And US veterans are about 2 times more likely than civilians to die by suicide. From 2005 to 2018, age and sex adjusted suicide rates increased by 25%, 25.6% for veterans with recent VHA use and 57% for veterans without that. So we start to see some indications that maybe the robust suicide prevention program the VA has been putting together since I started here almost 14 years ago is starting to make a difference. And we believe that's true, especially with the crisis line and the increased use that we have seen of that veterans crisis line over the years. Between 2017 and 2018, the age and sex adjusted suicide rate among veterans with recent VHA, Veterans Health Administration use, decreased by 2.4%, while among veterans who did not use VHA care, the rate increased by 2.5%. So again, these are relatively positive. You know, obviously, one suicide is too many, but we're seeing things moving in the right direction. To kind of put this into context, you may wonder, well, how many of our, you know, the adults in the U.S. are actually veterans? About 8% of our adult population consists of civilian veterans, just to give you a rough idea. And this is a slide on New York State data. And actually, New York State compared to other states is ahead of the game as far as suicide prevention goes. Our rates are lower. We're ranked 49th of the 50 states as far as suicide rates go. Yet our rates are still substantially high at 8.26 per 100,000. That compares to other states like Montana and Alaska that are closer to 30 per 100,000. I want to make a point, though, that within New York State, if you look at the variability between counties, what you'll find is that we have some counties in New York State that push that 30 number per 100,000, while we have others that are much lower. And so that's something to keep in mind. And specifically, rural counties seem to be having the highest rates. And we know in the US, the suicides in rural areas actually increased generally for all US citizens from increased by 48% from 2000 to 2018. And rural suicides are higher than urban suicides at a factor of 19.4 per 100,000 versus 13.4 in the urban area per 100,000. And certainly we also know that firearm suicide deaths are much more prevalent in rural versus urban areas. So you're going to hear themes today about, concern about what's going on in rural areas, the increased rate of suicides in general in rural area. Rural veterans, for example, have a 20% increase of death by suicide compared to urban areas, even controlling for access to care, demographic factors, and diagnoses. So there's something to that. So we're going to talk a lot about, how do we reach into the highest risk communities? What strategies might be most effective? And also, the other piece of this is addressing gun violence, knowing that firearm involvement was found in 77% of rural suicide deaths compared to 61% urban in the general population. And as you can see also for veterans, that suicide rate, especially for the male veterans, is primarily a factor of gun self-directed violence. So we have some layers of considerations here, and I wanted to make some points about some COVID related, not just COVID related. I would say in our society, there's just a lot more unrest, obviously, lately. And the things that are going on now that are very concerning, which makes me think that we might be heading into some trouble here, is we have observed an increase in gun ownership. We see that there is definitely more social isolation and loneliness now. There has been an increase in alcohol consumption and increases in anxiety, increased challenges with sleep and rest, more unemployment, more financial stress and bankruptcy than we've seen in the past, and more homelessness, and an increase in domestic violence. So all of these are risk factors that we need to be aware of. So I realize that was a relatively brief introduction to suicide in the veteran population, but I want to move now into the connection between spirituality and mental health, and this is where Bruce, Reverend Swingle, will take over.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And I also want to thank you for the opportunity to step into your circle and share with you a few thoughts and experiences this afternoon. On the next slide, let's see. As a chaplain, you might think I am a big fan of spirituality, and you would be correct. But I'm also a firm believer that when we take mental health and spirituality in partnership, we often can accomplish much more than either of us can do separately. When we think about spirituality, and that means different things to different people, one of my favorite quotations is from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who says, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." One of the things I appreciate about that perspective is that it reminds me when we talk about spirituality, we're not trying to add something onto a person, but simply acknowledging who they are. Viktor Frankl has said, "No cure that fails to engage our spirit can make us well." As we think about holistic health, that's a vital element. And from several years ago, a quotation in a newsletter said, "Part of humanizing healthcare is considering an individual's spirituality." And I think that's even more so true today. And yet for each of us and the people that we serve and our own life experiences and families and communities, there's a lot of struggles going on. And some of those we may address from mental health perspectives, but also from spiritual perspectives, simply bringing different resources and tools to the same issues. But some of those spiritual struggles can include trying to make sense out of life experiences. And I think we all face that as we age and go through life, or as we live through a pandemic. Issues of moral injury, where our personal beliefs and values can be challenged by our experiences, our actions and behaviors, or our observations. Feeling guilty and struggling with issues of forgiveness. When I was working at another VA hospital, we often did a spiritual assessment, and one of the responses that often came up with was a sense of feeling guilt over past behaviors. And how do we address that? A sense of hopelessness and seeking hope. While I was on the inpatient psychiatric unit as a chaplain, a couple of the social workers and I led a weekly discussion on the topic of hope, because whether we're dealing with suicide prevention or mental health and wellness, addictions and recovery, or just the stress of everyday living, hope is such an important element. And maybe that sometimes religious rituals and experiences or practices that were meaningful in the past seem to have lost that sense of meaning for us. Or we're looking, so where do we find meaning and purpose and power in our lives? So we all face some of these struggles. All right, next slide. And again, as a chaplain, I think we address these and have some resources to bring to those struggles. But several years ago, I asked a group of veterans, is spirituality really important to you, or is it just something that I enjoy? And this was some responses from our veterans in that group. They reported that spirituality helped reduce anxiety in their life, but it also increased their peace of mind. It offered hope, which we've mentioned already, gave them strength, provides guidance, and I love this one. It simply helped them live another day. All right, next slide. And then we keep coming back to those struggles because, again, living with a pandemic or just facing the challenges of everyday life, we, as I talked to some other chaplains and other priests and pastors that I know, these are some of the issues they said they're dealing with in their own faith communities and the places where they live. Again, that sense of isolation, lack of community or connection, and loneliness. You know, how do people stay connected when congregations have been closed for a little while, now perhaps are slowly reopening? How do people deal with a lack of purpose and role in their life if they're not considered an essential employee? What is their purpose? Where do they find that sense of meaning? Certainly facing the unknown, whether it's health, family, jobs, whatever that may be, when we just don't know what's coming next and we're kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop. And that can create fear and anxiety and just stress as we just try to stay focused in today, but often our mind is jumping farther down the road. How do we practice patience when it seems like a pandemic may be going on for a long time, longer than we first anticipated? Where do we place our trust? And in the middle of all this, how do we keep taking care of ourselves? And certainly the financial and economic concerns. So there's a lot of struggles out there, and yet spirituality can be one of the tools in the toolbox to help us to address this. So where do faith-based organizations find a role to play? Now, the reality is sometimes faith-based organizations have their own struggles. They may have limited resources. They may, the leaders of those congregations may have demands from their own faith tradition or denomination. Some of them are just now starting to reopen, and that's their priority. And so they can be challenged when we try to approach them and say, here's another important issue. But yet faith communities also can be a tremendous partner because they are a place of caring. They already exist in our local culture and environment. They already have tremendous connections with families, with leaders in their communities. And so we're not trying to establish a new agency or a nonprofit organization. We're tapping into people and faith communities who are already well established, often in their communities and even especially in their rural communities. Many of them have a concern for our veterans and a strong sense of wanting to serve those who have served. And from their own faith traditions or denominational perspective, many of them will have a special emphasis throughout the year on different topics or issues, including during Mental Health Awareness Month, where they may have a guest speaker or a message that relates to that specifically, or simply put out additional resources available for those who come to their congregation to access those resources. And yet across many traditions, one of the things that gives me hope as I find from various traditions and even those with no faith tradition, one of the bridges and areas of common ground is that sense of hospitality. Now that's a pretty deeply spiritual word in my mind and perspective, and there's a connection between hospitality and hospital, but I think it just exists in much of what we do in our faith communities and in our local agencies and organizations wherever you work and exist, because together we do provide a place to belong, a sense of welcome, a place to serve where perhaps you can find some of that meaning and purpose, and a message of hope. And so how do we put all this into action? Well, faith communities often will want to serve as partners in their communities. They're there, they're visible, but they don't want to do everything on their own. They enjoy that partnership of joining with others, whether it's other faith communities or other agencies. They have this sense of wanting to assist those in need. They're aware of what's happening around them, and often will be some of the first people to want to respond to a local crisis, whether that's a weather-related problem or a suicide in their community or whatever it may be. And they often can model tolerance and acceptance and help remove the stigma of mental health struggles and illness. I've had some veterans say to me, in all honesty, I don't want to go to the church because I think I'll be judged. But I've had even more veterans say to me, the church is one place I feel welcome and accepted and safe. And so how can faith communities as well as faith-based organizations in our communities be of assistance and become partners for us? One, they raise awareness of issues, of resources. They can provide training such as this video or other resources from their denomination. They promote self-care. They help us remember this is important. They support mental health and wellness. They recognize people at risk. Often our faith communities will notice something's different about someone long before I may see that person in the VA or before they may walk into your agency or organization. As they're aware of other resources, they make referrals and they can make those resources visible. They offer traditional religious practices that may help to strengthen coping skills and reduce stress. And they can help address those wide variety of struggles that we've talked about as people seek for meaning and purpose and power in their lives. And so our clergy and our community leaders can help in different ways. On the next slide, we see that one of their key functions, as I've learned through the years, is they serve as gatekeepers. And it took me a while to get this concept in my mind, but a gatekeeper, I understand as someone who's a leader in their community, who has face-to-face contact with many people as part of their daily or weekly routine. And they're there to offer support, sometimes through traditional religious practices, perhaps informally over a conversation on the telephone or a cup of coffee, or through formal counseling, or through responding to the spiritual and pastoral needs they become aware of. At the bottom is one of my favorite concepts, that as leaders in our congregations and our communities, together we often deal in the currency of hope. And yet we do realize that as we try to prevent suicide, faith communities know the people in their congregations, but also the people in their surrounding geography and in rural areas. They know their neighbors in the towns, what's happening. They can withhold judgment and help people as they face their struggles and reduce stigma. But when a suicide does occur, they continue to be present, to communicate love to survivors, care for families, continue to offer self-care, and simply be present and stay connected. And so whether it's a faith community or your own agency in your role, wherever you work and live, we can be there for our veterans and others in need. And from our unique backgrounds, our sense of mission, from our agency or our faith tradition, each of us can contribute to a person's spirituality, their hope, and their peace of mind. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Bruce. So I'm going to say a little bit more about this project that we did. When I say we, Bruce, myself, and others here in Albany developed 4 years ago, and what the background is. And then we're going to share with you a video that's about 30 minutes long and an associated vignette that shows how this part of how this process works. But as far as the background goes, it was in 2017 that I was having a conversation with my supervisor at the time, Glenn Gilbert, and we recognized that, you know, 2/3 of veterans who die by suicide are not in our care. And so here we are doing all this work, and good work and effective and meaningful work for veterans who we do see, but we recognize there's this majority of them that they aren't even coming through our doors. What do we do about that? And so this is where we came up with this idea that maybe what we need to do is more outreach in partnership with faith-based organizations. And it was actually Glenn Gilbert's idea to do that. And I just ran with it. I thought that's a fantastic idea. How do we partner with them? Since then, we've broadened this kind of partnership to other organizations, leading organizations in communities. So it's not just faith-based organizations, but they are one of our key partners, and they're natural helpers in the community. So they're a critical part of this process for us. And so this kind of became like a pilot program at that time. And we needed some money to put together funding for video because our idea was we're going to create a video that we'll use as part of our community trainings. And then we'll ask the folks who come to those trainings to then take that training and share it further. The idea is that, you know, it's the training has all the key components, and there's fidelity in sharing that video, but also along with it, wallet cards, which now we're doing digital wallet cards that show the process of how we cultivate hope. And that's the video explains, you know, all the key elements of a really good, strong gatekeeper training. I will say that the sun, soil, water method that we're going to talk about today is very consistent and falls within the framework of what some of you may have heard of, which is VA SAVE. VA SAVE is the guide training, we call it, or gatekeeper training that's been in place since 2007 or 2008 probably. And SAVE stands for see the warning signs, ask questions, validate, and then ultimately encourage treatment or expedite a referral. So it's that same framework, except it's more detailed, with the idea that as we're training people and using this video to help further train people, they have a much more structured step-by-step process that they can be aware of and feel empowered to carry out. And you'll get more of that from the video itself. So we entered this idea into the Shark Tank, the VA Shark Tank process. They had 350 plus submissions that year. There were 10 winners, and this was the biggest winner, and across all disciplines. So people, you know, offering new prosthetic ideas, and you know how Shark Tank worked, was all kinds of ideas. And the people who were bidding were regional directors and medical center directors across the country. And so there were 17 bids. We ended up going to Salt Lake City, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Fargo, North Dakota, and training them there. And they all carried this out, and it was very successful. This process was then further honed and shaped by the diffusion of excellence, dynamic diffusion network, and now is part of the VA's diffusion marketplace as a item or as a option for programs across the country to adopt and put into practice. And so we've operationalized every aspect of this. So what we want to do is get right to the video itself, and I'm going to see how I'm going to do with this technology here. And so, as I said, this is about 30 minutes, and please let me know if there's any sound issues. We'll get right into it.
I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm good. But I have a story, and I don't know where to start.
I'm good. but I feel alone in a crowd.
I'm good, but nobody understands.
I'm good. The past keeps coming back.
But I can't get out of bed.
But I can't sleep.
I'm good, but I feel overwhelmed.
I'm good, but I don't feel safe.
But I don't even know who I am anymore.
But I still have nightmares. But I don't need any help.
I'm good, but I don't feel anything anymore.
I'm good, but I can't live like this anymore.
I'm really not so good. But are you ready to listen?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Corradolo. I will be facilitating the interviews for the educational program today. The objectives for today's program are understanding the problem of suicide in the military service member and veteran population, demystifying suicide in such a way that you will understand why they happen, debunking some common myths about suicide, learning about the warning signs that indicate someone may be struggling with a mental health challenge and could be at risk for suicide, learning a strategy that will enable you to have a productive conversation with an at-risk individual that leads to connecting him or her to care, knowing what resources are available to suicidal individuals and how to access those resources, and understanding the importance of gun locks and how they can be a barrier to an impulsive act.
The reasons why a person considers suicide and acts on suicidal thoughts can be puzzling. This simple metaphor, a fire, can shed some light on key factors in a suicide. The fuel in a fire is wood, while the fuel in a suicide crisis is underlying vulnerabilities. These usually stem from a mental health or substance use disorder and are often linked to genetics, early childhood life disruptions, or both. A fire cannot exist without oxygen. The oxygen in a suicide crisis is emotional distress. Something or some things are deeply troubling the individual. For example, a divorce, a newly diagnosed serious medical condition, financial strain, or job loss. In addition, while an abundance of oxygen is needed to help a fire burn, there will also be an absence of carbon dioxide. The absence of CO2 for a fire translates into the absence of adequate coping skills for an individual experiencing a suicide crisis. For example, perhaps the person tends to isolate rather than reach out for help, or has difficulty identifying and expressing his or her feelings. And there are many other examples of problematic coping skills. Finally, for a fire to burn, there must be a heat source or a spark. I like to think of this as the flint and steel. The flint in the suicide crisis is when the individual believes that taking his or her own life is a viable option, that it will solve his or her problems. The steel is the gun or other means of suicide available at the time, which can often be just a moment of crisis. It is often a combination of these factors: vulnerability linked to a mental health or substance use disorder, overwhelming stressors, limited coping capacity, the belief that suicide will solve the problems, and access to methods of suicide that can lead to the ultimate act of suicide. I want to make one last point. Just as alcohol is an accelerant in a fire, meaning it causes it to ignite faster and burn hotter, the same can be said of the impact of alcohol on a suicide crisis. It impairs judgment, lessens inhibitions, and makes a person more depressed. Alcohol is an accelerant in a suicide crisis. In fact, alcohol is a factor in close to 1/3 of US suicides.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter, for joining us. How big is the problem of suicide among veterans?
Well, suicide is a problem nationally for all Americans in that it's a 10th leading cause of death. And it's also, we're at a rate of 46,000 suicides per year now. So it's a national problem, but the veterans are almost twice as likely as civilians to die by suicide. So we're very concerned about the veteran population in particular. There's actually about 20 veteran suicide deaths every single day.
And of those 20 veterans who die by suicide each day, are they all connected to VA care?
No, only about 2/3 of them are, I'm sorry, only about 1/3 of them is connected to VA care. 2/3 are not in our system.
Are there certain populations of veterans that are most concerning as it relates to suicide?
Well, like the general population, the rates are highest among older veterans and Americans. But there are some unique patterns that we're seeing in the data. And one of them is that the younger veterans, those 20 to 30 years old, especially the female veterans, are dying at much higher rates compared to the same age civilian cohorts.
Is there something about service members and veterans that you can point to that increases their risk for suicide?
Yeah, well, there are a couple things that come to mind. One of them is just the training that service members get. They're trained to be tough and unflappable, and they're trained to serve others and really be committed to service of others. And so oftentimes it's hard for the veteran to then say, I need to now help myself and turn it around in that way. In addition, we know that many veterans have guns, and most suicides are by guns. So it's definitely access to guns is a factor in suicides as well.
I do hear about gun violence a lot on the news all too frequently. Would you say that there's a significant amount of suicides by guns?
It's actually about 2/3 of gun-related deaths are suicides.
Is it okay to ask veterans if they're having thoughts of suicide, or do you think that that would plant the idea in their mind?
It's a great question. It is very important that if you're worried about somebody that you ask them directly about suicide. There's no research to support the idea that you might plant the idea in their head. So if you're worried about somebody, you certainly should approach them and ask them that question. Are you having thoughts of taking your own life?
So it won't give them the idea of suicide. Okay. Is it true that there is a difference between people who talk about suicide and those who act on suicide?
That's an interesting question. We break that down into two parts. The first is, if someone's talking about suicide, should we take them seriously? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. What we know through the research is that people who take their own lives have to work through the fear of doing it. And one of the ways they do that is by talking about death and dying and suicide. So we should always take that seriously. The other side of the equation has to do with this idea that someone will just take their own lives and never give you any warning sign or indication. And there are populations, and vets being one of them, where they often keep their cards very close to their vest, and it can be difficult to see those warning signs, which is why we talk about that, and we'll talk about those warning signs and what to pay attention to.
If a veteran has children, family, future plans, are those sort of protective factors that could be a deterrent to suicide?
Yeah, definitely. Those are protective factors, meaning statistically speaking, folks who have taken care of their children or have future plans or have a strong therapeutic alliance with their provider, they're less likely to engage in a suicide act. However, suicides happen when people are in a time of crisis in their lives and they're not thinking clearly. They're more apt to behave impulsively and not really consider the consequences of their actions. So even though, yes, those are a deterrent, they may not be enough in that moment of crisis.
So it's hard to see outside of the crisis.
Yes, exactly.
If someone really wants to take their own life, is it realistic to think that we can still help them and prevent suicide if they've made up their mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it really, when somebody gets to that point where they're ready to take their own life, it really is that much more important that the rest of us are aware of what's going on and we step in to intervene and get that person to help as quickly as possible. Treatment works. People who attempt suicide and live are really glad they're still alive. And people who get into treatment ultimately do better and they come out on the other side in a much better place.
There can be many different indicators that someone may be struggling with a mental illness, addiction, or thoughts of suicide. Many are easy to identify. For example, You may notice the individual does not seem to be him or herself. There may be sudden or gradual changes in behavior that are unusual or unfitting. A person considering suicide often behaves in ways that differ in terms of normal routines or ways of interacting with others. You may also notice that he or she is unusually angry, anxious, agitated, or moody. For example, the person may overreact or become very irritable or be unable to calm down. These mood challenges may also be associated with poor sleep or alcohol abuse. You may have noticed he or she isolating at work or disengaging in usual recreational activities. You may notice he or she is withdrawing from family and friends, or he or she may stop taking part in activities that used to be enjoyable. In more severe cases, the person may neglect responsibilities at home, work, or school. Pay particular attention to statements like, "There is no reason to live," or "I feel like a burden on my family," or "My life has no meaning or purpose." Giving away prized possessions may be another warning sign, especially when combined with the others discussed. In addition, you may take notice of poor self-care, risky behavior, or substance abuse. For instance, someone may exhibit poor hygiene, or the person may start drinking to excess or engage in other self-destructive behavior. His or her judgment may seem impaired, or you may witness impulsive behavior. It's especially important to pay attention to statements that may indicate the veteran is experiencing hopelessness. In doing so, you may realize he or she is feeling trapped or overwhelmed by his or her circumstances. For example, perhaps the veteran is normally very positive and optimistic, but now he or she is discouraged and expresses hopelessness. Oftentimes, when a person feels trapped by life circumstances, he or she may start to think about drastic solutions, and he or she may come to believe that suicide would be one of those solutions. It's important to realize that when feeling distressed, trapped, or desperate, the suicidal individual often does not understand the devastating consequences of suicide to family, friends, and communities. They are not likely going to understand during this time of crisis that their situation will improve in time and that he or she is tremendously valued and loved. There are also red flags. These are indicators that suicide could be imminent. In these moments, the veteran may be burdened by extreme feelings of grief, worthlessness, or guilt. In such times of crisis, the individual ultimately sees no way out of his or her situation and will often believe that the world would be better off without him or her. Certain behaviors can be clear indicators of imminent suicide risk, especially when there is ready access to guns or other means of suicide. These red flag warning signs include suicide statements, expressing thoughts or plans about taking his or her own life, talking about death, dying, or suicide, looking for ways to end one's life, self-destructive or risk-taking behavior, and being highly intoxicated, irrational, anxious, and/or agitated. Remember, everyone has a role to play in suicide prevention. Simple everyday connections can make a big difference to someone who is in crisis or having suicidal thoughts. Consider how you may act to be there by calling someone, reconnecting, meeting for coffee, going for a walk together, etc.
I understand that you developed a simple metaphor that makes it easy to remember the steps to helping someone who is showing these warning signs of a mental health crisis. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the metaphor uses acronyms of sun, soil, and water, and the idea is to cultivate seeds of hope. And the seed in this case are those unmet emotional and spiritual needs.
We're joined now by Reverend Bruce Swingle. Reverend Swingle, Dr. Hunter indicated that the seed is a component of the sun, soil, water metaphor. That this refers to an individual's unmet spiritual and emotional needs. Can you say more about that?
The seed metaphor invites us to see those D words that may correlate with feelings such as despair, depression, despondency, disillusionment, distress. Once we recognize those, we don't stop there. We then, in many ways, become practitioners of hope. We deal in the currency of hope as we respect and relate to that individual veteran, their personal values, and the goals in their own life.
It's time for us to learn how we can help a veteran or service member once the warning signs have revealed something is not right. How would we go beyond "I'm good" and open a conversation with somebody at risk?
We use the sun, soil, water as a metaphor to help with that. We will explain when it's important to seek consultation as part of this process and actually how to do that. We will also review the resources for veterans at the VA, as well as the county and local programs. We'll discuss barriers to impulsive suicides, for example, using gun locks as a barrier to an impulsive act. And we'll also, again, look at a vignette that shows how this process is carried out. We talked about how the warning signs reveal underlying states like distress and despair and disillusionment. I'd like to go to the next step now. And again, we're going to use this metaphor that I think is very helpful. And you can see it by the metaphor. The sun, soil, and water represent 3 steps. And these are acronyms, where the sun stands for your stance, where you uncover the unmet need and nudge someone to talk about it. In step 2, we start the conversation by saying something, making an observation, inquiring, and listening. And in step 3, where we complete the process, we welcome information, ask questions, tie it all together, educate about resources, and encourage treatment, and ultimately refer the at-risk veteran to resources, and we'll discuss what those are. So again, the first step is the sun, and that is to prepare your thoughts. In this process, it's important to come from a place of care and concern, your stance. You want to offer non-judgmental support, and you want to offer honest feedback. We want to uncover the you in sun, uncover what's going on. We have to go beyond "I'm good." We have to look at what is really going on, uncover the truth, that underlying distress, despair, discouragement, etc. Ultimately, we want to nudge the veteran or service member to recognize that something is up, that everything isn't okay, and to consider seeking help. And also, we want to actually nudge them to make a choice, to actually select one of the resources that we will discuss with them and make available to them. There is a caveat here, and this is very important. There are times when you should not have a conversation with a veteran who may be experiencing mental health crisis. And why would that be? First of all, if you feel you're going to offend the veteran or may be at risk of harm, they're going to harm you physically or verbally in any way. If you raise a concern, seek professional guidance first. Also, we never want to approach someone about a concern when they're excessively angry, intoxicated, irrational, or irritable. Remember, under these circumstances, call us, your suicide prevention specialists, who can assist with the next steps. So step 2 is then to go ahead and start that conversation. And SOIL is the acronym that helps us remember how to do this. The S in SOIL stands for say something. Start the conversation rather than being passive and standing by, which is often our, where we're left feeling kind of like there's nothing we can do. Start the conversation. Say something like, "Can I ask you something?" Or, "I noticed that you're not yourself lately." You want to follow that up with an observation that is neutral and non-offensive. O in SOIL stands for that observation. You seem distant or distracted, frustrated, or on edge. Again, a non-judgmental term. The I is to inquire. We want to use an open-ended question. What's going on? What's on your mind? Penny for your thought. What gives? Inquire about what the concerns are. The L in SOIL is to listen. We want to pay attention to body language. We want to identify their thoughts. These are their worries and concerns and what related feelings they have. We do this without judgment, without immediate advice, without interruption. Again, observing body language to recognize those feelings and recognize those worries and concerns as thoughts. And already we are at the 3rd step where we're going to complete the process. And water is the metaphor that guides us through this process. If you have them talking, you've already made a difference here.
Water will enliven the growth of the seed. Similarly, the following steps will foster a further opening up and then offer direction for help. This is the third and the final step of the process necessary to cultivate hope and begin the healing process. The W in water stands for welcome. Beyond listening, we want to welcome the W in water, the information shared to encourage the veteran to say more. Using a restatement is a very powerful way to do that. Here's an example of a restatement. After starting the discussion, you learn that this veteran, who is your cousin in this example, has not been sleeping. She goes on to say to you, I'm just not getting enough rest. I feel like I'm tossing and turning all night. Quite simply, you might say back, so you're doing a lot of tossing and turning throughout the night. A likely response to your restatement might be, yeah, and I often wake up with my heart racing and I have dreams about getting blown up. Then after a long night of this, I wake up feeling like I didn't get any sleep at all. So we want to welcome the information and have the veteran open up and share this information. We do this by offering support and a listening ear, inviting him or her to say more about what's going on. And of course, it's also important to go ahead and use that restatement. The A in water stands for ask. It's important that you ask additional questions that may help you gauge just how bad things are for him or her. Many of our veterans experience horrible and unthinkable situations while serving our country. They may be embarrassed or ashamed to discuss them. They may be trying to avoid memories of the past events because they're painful. As we ask questions, this may become more apparent. Unfortunately, when these deeper issues are not addressed, though, there's a greater risk that the veteran may consider suicide as an option to escape these memories or feelings. So we must approach the veteran with a great deal of concern and respect as we seek to understand what is going on from their perspective. When the veteran appears to be struggling with a deeply felt emotional, spiritual issue, it's very important to ask about suicidality. So we want to use open-ended questions. Again, these are questions that cannot simply be answered with one word, yes or no. We want to seek to understand their perspective. And then we do ask the closed-ended question, a very specific question, are you having thoughts of taking your own life? And this is where we offer an additional very important caveat. Beyond that, ask if there's a plan in place to attempt suicide, and ask if they intend to carry out a suicide plan. The next step in water is T, tie it all together. We want to summarize their thinking, relate the thoughts to the feelings they shared, and relate those thoughts and feelings to your original observation. So you may say something like, so now I understand why you seem so tired. You haven't been sleeping well, you've been having nightmares. And as a result of that, you've been really struggling to engage in anything every day on a regular basis. And it's been hard to get anything done. And so I understand why you have been having thoughts of suicide. So again, this is just an example of what it might sound like as you tie things together. The next step is to educate. We want to discuss the VA resources, faith-based organizations as a resource, and other community resources. We want to provide literature, keychains, and wristbands, etc. The R in water stands for refer. This is really the last step here, and we want to encourage treatment and ultimately refer the individual to help. Beyond, though, giving them the name or of a place or giving them a phone number, we want to review those options that they have and then recommend one or help them, guide them to one that they're willing to reach out to, and then actually offer assistance to help them reach out to that specific resource, whether it's the crisis line, sitting down with them and calling that 800-273-8255 together, or if they would like to go to the hospital, take them directly to the emergency room. This is where we have another very important caveat. And if there is a suicide plan with intent, this requires an immediate referral. What does that mean? If someone is saying, yes, I have a plan to take my own life and I do intend to carry it out, we have to take certain actions. First of all, we have to seek help immediately. And as we're doing that, we want to stay with the veteran or service member. Don't leave the suicidal individual alone. We also want to pass along the information shared with the police or other emergency personnel. This gets dicey when you get to this point. It's a rare occasion, but it could happen. And when it does, and you have doubts about what to do, you can call the crisis line, the Veterans Crisis Line at 800-273-8255. Be sure to press 1 for service members and veterans, and the responders will help guide you in next steps. Or if you're not sure what to do, they can help answer questions for you. So we have developed a wallet-sized reminder card that can help you remember these warning signs, and also the process using this metaphor of the sun, soil, water, where the seed is that unmet need, and empower you with the tools necessary to cultivate hope. You'll see here 2 slides, and on the first slide, you see kind of that metaphor of the sun, soil, water with a little plant, seed, and so forth. On this slide, you have the details. You have step 1, prepare your thoughts with the stance, uncover, nudge. Step 2, to start the conversation, say something, observe, inquire, and listen. And step 3, to complete the process, to welcome the information, ask questions, ask about suicidal thoughts, tie the information together, educate about resources, and make that referral and connect that veteran or service member to the help they need.
I want to circle back and talk to you about the issue of guns. Many veterans and service members have guns and don't want to give them up. Besides gun locks, are there other ways to address weapons to prevent suicide?
The issue of guns is very important because, most people who attempt suicide and live are very glad they're still alive. But when you engage in suicide by gun, there's no turning around. There's no, it's the end of the road, literally. And so it's important to understand that, we want to address access to guns for veterans who are at risk, to create a barrier to an impulsive act. And this can be done in many different ways. Yes, we give out free gun locks at the VA, and anybody can ask for them and get them into homes where veterans live or frequent. But there are other ways, locking the guns in a gun cabinet and giving the keys or the combination to somebody else for safekeeping when you have someone who's at risk in that house. Getting rid of the bullets, removing the bullets from the home. You can't use a gun without bullets. Locking the bullets up separately with a key and combination given to somebody else. All of these are barriers to an impulsive act. If they're willing, the best thing to do is to remove the weapons from the home, at least temporarily. Obviously, if it's not there, you can't use it. And so, but yes, the issue of addressing access to weapons for someone who's known to be at risk for suicide is extremely important.
Just one final question. What resources are available to veterans and service members who are willing to seek help? And how does one go about locating those resources?
That's a great question. I'm going to start with just talking about the Veterans Crisis Line. And I'm going to put a slide up so you can see this, but there have been over 3.8 million calls to the crisis line since it started in 2007. This is a tremendous operation. Veterans can access the crisis line by texting 838255. They can go onto the VA's website, va.gov, and discover the self-test. And also folks in your area, for example, suicide prevention coordinators who live close to the particular veteran, who they can reach out to and talk to. But the Veterans Crisis Line is a tremendous resource. It has grown over the years and it is highly utilized. And it would be, by recommendation that we share, wristbands and keychains and other things of that nature with veterans and service members as much as possible, because they have that crisis line on it, and that crisis line can really be a lifesaver and has been for many veterans in my own experience. But there are other resources that are available, and I like to take the attitude that there's no wrong door. Meaning, if someone would prefer to talk to their clergy member, their faith-based leader, that's fine. If someone is interested in, going to a peer support program rather than the VA or the vet center, that's okay. The VA has a very robust behavioral health program, and if someone is serious about and ready to get help, they can come and get counseling through the VA. The vet center is there for combat veterans and other veterans, certain other categories of veterans. Combat veterans come to the VA as well, of course. So there are a slew of resources in the community and at the VA. I will mention also there are county and state programs. On the back of your insurance card, most people will have a mental health number. And you call that number and you can get referrals to a private psychologist or social worker or even psychiatrist within your own community. So there are many different ways to seek treatment. And the point here is that when we connect them, we want to connect them to one of these things.
As we think about working with others, this could be your brother, sister, mother or father, cousin or friend, someone that is in your circle of care. So remember that everyone has a role to play in this. to be there for others. And then finally, I'd like to just thank everyone for partnering with us, and on behalf of the VA, to say thank you for your caring community and your partnership.
Okay, so we did have some technical difficulties there, and I apologize for that. But what I'd like to do next is share with you a vignette that demonstrates the process. Bear with me for a minute. I'm going to rediscover the training. Get this out of my way. There. And go down one more slide. Okay. And this vignette demonstrates the process. And hopefully we won't have the same video issues. If we do, we will skip this and go right to questions and more discussion.
I'm not sure Layla's okay. She looks so tired and disheveled. Irritable with her husband Rob lately, and she hasn't gone to church in a few months. She used to go every week. I should see what's going on with her. Let's think this through. Son. S. Stance. Be open, honest, and non-judgmental. Okay, I can do that. U. Uncover the truth, the unmet need. N. Nudge her to get help. Okay, I can do this. Here goes. Hey, Layla. Can I ask you something?
Yeah?
You don't really seem yourself lately.
What do you mean?
I mean, I don't know. You seem distracted or worried or something. What's going on?
I'm fine.
No, something's definitely going on. Come on, you can tell me.
You wouldn't understand.
Try me.
It's about that dream.
Dream? Is this the one where the truck in your convoy hits an IED?
Yeah, that one.
How long has this been going on?
Weeks. I can't remember the last time I had a good night's sleep. I'm restless, tossing and turning every night.
You've been having this nightmare for weeks and you're having trouble sleeping every night?
I wake up terrified and completely covered in sweat. I've been home for over a year. This shouldn't be happening anymore.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, that and ashamed because of what we did in their town. I see the faces of the children. I just can't take this anymore. I'm exhausted and fed up. I don't think I can handle it anymore.
How bad is this? Are you having thoughts of taking your own life? Like suicide?
Yeah. Of course, every morning. I feel like a shell of a person, like I'm dead inside. I don't want to be a strain on Rob or you or anyone. I think you'd be better off without me.
I'm really glad you told me this. And I'm sorry things have been so bad lately. Have you considered a specific plan?
My gun has been loaded with a bullet for the past month. Just one pull of the trigger and this would all go away. So a plan? Yeah, you could say I've got a plan.
Well, I mean, at least I understand what's wrong. I mean, you have been really upset, and that explains why you look so tired and irritable, and You've been isolating yourself. And you're right, I will never fully understand. I wasn't in Iraq, but I mean, I do understand that you've been having these nightmares and you've been feeling fear and shame. You're worried that you're going to be a burden on us, your family and friends. For one, I'm really glad that I know the truth. I mean, I would rather have that than having you hurt or kill yourself. I'm your best friend. I'm here for you. Thanks. It means a lot. Well, it sounds to me like you're having symptoms of PTSD. I mean, I know you're not alone. I mean, remember my dad, when he came back from Vietnam, he was angry all the time when we were kids. He went to the VA, and after a while, he was a different person. I think maybe the VA could help you too. Yeah, I do remember that actually. Or you could talk to Pastor Bryant. I mean, I know he's talked to other veterans about their struggles. And there's a veterans crisis line that you can call at any time. I mean, you shouldn't have to wake up in the middle of the night and not have anyone to talk to. Give me your phone. I'll put it in. I have a keychain with that number on it as well, so I'll get that for you. You're not alone, okay? You're right. I know you're right. Thanks for caring. Now, about that gun. Let me take it for now. You don't need to be doing anything that can't be undone. This situation will get better. I mean, especially after you start getting help for those dreams and memories. I'm not giving up my gun. You can forget about that. I might never get it back. Okay, but we at least need to put a gun lock on it for now. And I'll keep the key. Fair? Sure, Tony, you can lock it up, but you can't take it. Okay. So let's call over the VA now. I mean, at the very least, they can treat those nightmares with medication. Hi, yeah, my name is Tony James, and I'm here with my friend Layla, who's an OIF veteran. She's been having nightmares and thoughts of suicide. She has a gun too, but I'm gonna lock it up for her. She's willing to come in and get some help. Can you tell us what the process is to get started? I'm not sure Layla's okay. She looks so tired and disheveled. She's been more...
All right. Okay, so again, I apologize for some of the technical issues that we had, but I think we managed to, that part seems to have worked. And let's get back to sharing the screen here. Okay, so again, this is the video that we are sharing with the community, the main training video, and then the vignette with it. And we're sharing it through many different ways. We have a USB drive that we give, but lately, since we've been doing this training remotely, we share that video through actually a link in an email. And it normally does work better than that. Apparently I don't have great cell signal here or Wi-Fi signal, I apologize. So the video was a little broken up and you saw a lot of very unflattering pictures of myself and some of my colleagues, but nevertheless, I think you could at least hear the whole thing going through, and the video is available for you to watch if you want to see everything actually moving in time with the speech and get the full video effect. So at this point, I think we'll pause and see if there are questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe and Bruce, for the overview. Not seeing any immediate questions. I had a couple of things that came up just to at least maybe start things off. I wonder what your experiences have been as it relates to how civilians might use this versus veteran to veteran, and are there differences, or is there anything, if I'm a loved one, a family member, I have a friend who served in the military, anything that we should know, right, in terms of using this as opposed to somebody who maybe has more of a shared experience?
So this model is actually not designed to target the veterans, him or herself. In other words, we don't necessarily want or expect this video to be seen by veterans. This video is designed to go out to faith-based and other organizations who will share it widely within the community, whether it's at the fire department or if it's at a men's group that they're doing, an AA meeting, anywhere there's an opportunity to share with other people. And so the idea is you don't have to be a veteran to understand and have a conversation with somebody. And that's why I like the vignettes, because they kind of demonstrate a non-veteran to a veteran conversation. It's because that can be an awkward kind of like, I don't really, and we don't really know, nobody really knows what happens in somebody else's shoes regardless. But it's sometimes there's a bit of a hesitation, I think, that you're pointing out, Garrett, when you try to approach someone who's in the military, because you just don't really fully understand that experience and you're a little bit fearful. The idea of this process is to give people the confidence, more than the knowledge and the skills, but the confidence to say, I can have this conversation. I'm worried about this person. I'm seeing these warning signs. I know they're in trouble. I know they're hurting. What can I do about it? Well, here it is. It's right on this wallet card. The wallet card, the video you might have seen 6 months before. You may not remember a thing about it, but hopefully you took a picture of the wallet card. You have a digital copy, or you have that hard copy, and you can reference it and say, okay, son, so what? I can do this conversation. Let me give it a shot. Something's going to happen. One of the biggest things about this is just how you start that conversation. What do you say? Hey, you don't seem yourself lately. Everything flows from that, right? Well, what do you mean? We don't want to be offensive. You seem distracted. You seem, you don't seem as engaged as you normally are. What's going on? You see how that just kind of naturally flows. So that's what we're going for with that.
There was a question in the chat on, as it relates to how can people access the card? So what would, I guess, just a broader question in general, like how would communities or individuals bring this content to their organization or to their community? But more specifically, the question was around the wallet cards.
Yeah. So the bigger question is where do we go from here as far as this training goes? And right now we've kind of been in a pilot mode, and the VA's, central office has reviewed this program. They put it on the diffusion marketplace, and they're encouraging us to spread it widely. As far as where we're at now, other than these local communities that I mentioned in these other states, we are, and those other places that have adopted it, we are kind of at a mixed point in terms of the spread of this innovation, which means that, for example, in the Albany catchment area, which goes up all the way to the Canadian border and west to Oneonta and south to Kingston, we are now doing this training mostly virtually now because of COVID. And it's live. As far as down south, I don't know that we have a person in my role down there who's adopted this particular practice yet. So the other question though that you asked is, how do we share this information? What we do at a training event where we're inviting in community leaders, and many faith-based leaders are deliberately targeted as part of that, is we are sharing with them the PowerPoint presentation and the links to the videos. And we're encouraging them to share it as widely as possible within their circles, right? So it's a train the trainer model with the idea that the fidelity of the training itself is maintained within the video. Of course, our video is all choppy, which might bring that into question, but under normal circumstances, you have it there, and the wallet card reinforces that. So the wallet card we have done is a digital wallet card. In addition, we have laminated versions. So when we do this in-person visit, I literally bring hundreds of the laminated wallet cards and ask them to send them, give those out widely. What I didn't say before, or maybe really emphasize in the introduction of this, is a big part of this is we're giving out gun locks. So, the Albany catchment area, while it's fairly widespread, just to give you an idea, we gave out 8,000 free gun locks in 2019. Most of those as a result of this program, where when we went out into the community and did the training, we brought with us literally hundreds of gun locks and encouraged people to share those widely in homes where veterans live or frequent. And some of the latest research that I've been exposed to, especially talking about rural areas, says that perhaps the single most important thing you can do is address gun safety and access for people who are potentially at risk. And the one piece of this program, and obviously you saw it, but I think that's an extremely strong component of this program, not only talking about it, we're not trying to take people's guns. We're trying to say, listen, create a barrier to an impulsive act. Here's a slew of ways to do it. Choose one and do it. And, you know, create safety in your community for those individuals, because it is so important to do that.
Thank you. There was a question just whether or not you might be able to loop back on the slide deck and bring up the slide with the wallet card on it. And while you're doing that, I wonder, Reverend Swingle, we were talking before we actually opened up the waiting room to everyone. And, you know, for communities, especially for coalitions, but any organization that's looking to partner with faith communities, and I know this is sort of a very broad strokes question, but what's the elevator speech like? What's the conversation? How would you go about to engage and invite faith communities to be part of this conversation if they're not already, you know, to help understand what's the role they can play?
And that can be a challenge because it depends on the person who's leading that congregation or faith-based community and what other priorities they have from their denomination. And I've had some faith communities that we've invited say, you know what, we've never had this experience in our congregation, not even in our community, it's not important to us. But then I find that when we've been most effective, you know, is to be invitational. You know, first make that connection, and if possible in person or over the phone, not just by email, because faith communities get lots of emails and invitations. But if you can talk to someone face to face or in person over the telephone, you know, to have that personal connection, I think that often goes better, and that way it gives them a chance to answer questions and to make them aware of the opportunities. And some faith communities, people do need continuing education credit, so they may see this as an option for that. But I think just that building relationships and going back to that sense of hospitality, whether it's with the veterans or the community or the faith communities.
Thank you. It dawned on me just with the sun, soil, water framing of this and recognizing that a vast majority of New York State is rural in nature, you know, that idea would certainly resonate with the farming and agricultural community. So I wonder, has there been any thought or discussion working with FarmNet, for example, or 4-H in terms of partnering on using some of the work that they do to disseminate this?
All right, let me try to tackle that. I was pulling up the wallet card as you were speaking, so
oh, sorry.
no, that's okay. It didn't come up well anyway. At least half of it didn't, so which is kind of unfortunate. Now, are you saying, is your question, how do we reach out specifically to try to target farmers in rural communities? Is that
I guess that was, you're right. It was not a well-formed question by any stretch, but I guess that was in essence part of it, you know, that because that can be a difficult population to reach, you know, and recognizing the FarmNet by virtue of what they do, you know, meets farmers literally where they're at. Right. Oftentimes the entry point is due to financial planning or concerns over the farm, but they're also partnered with a mental health professional because that's often when other conversations and mental health conversations and concerns come up. I could imagine that just the metaphor with sun, soil, water might be appealing on some level, right?
It is. It definitely is. And I, you know, the one of the reasons why we started with faith-based organizations is because they're everywhere. They're embedded into all communities. And I agree with you. Well, we do know that farmers are at significantly greater risk, and many of them are veterans as well. Mm-hmm. And so we have had conversations. I know we were out in Montgomery County, Bruce, you may recall, quite a few conversations about the farmers in that area and the strain that they're under with the, the financial issues and so forth. And there was a lot of communities, especially faith-based organizations, understand their needs in their own communities. And so they were able to educate us about, the issues there specifically, but also were creative in terms of thinking about how they would take this information and share it widely. So remember, again, the target audience isn't necessarily that at-risk person, him or herself, but people around who know and would have connections with him or her. And that's what we're shooting for.
Okay. Thank you. We've got a couple minutes left. I'm not, let's see, there's a question that came in. As a police officer in dealing with these issues, there's a large uptick in suicide and overdoses. Are you noticing any uptick within the veteran community, specifically with overdose, accidental or purposeful? So for either of you, are you noticing anything in, say, the capital region?
I would say specifically to veterans, it's hard for us to say because we are always seeing a trend towards more suicide attempts in the spring. And just to give you an idea, we kind of, we take a special interest in what we would call our high risk veterans, and we have special protocols that we put in place for them. And over a course of a year, we may add 100 people to our high risk list who, we're going to keep a closer eye on. Just to put in perspective for you, we've had about 15 new people in the last 3 weeks. So it's as far as, the intensity of, business, if you will, I hate to put it that way, in suicide prevention has gone up, and it always does in the spring, but it seems more so this year. But to tease out the overdose as a positive part of that, I couldn't really say at this point. We'd actually have to probably go back and look at our data afterwards. I'm seeing an increase of risk as it relates to all kinds of methods of suicide and not necessarily specifically to suicide.
And I know, speaking over the past year or so since the pandemic, much of the US and certainly many counties in New York State has seen an increase in overdoses, at least in pockets. And I think to the question, it's really hard to determine intention. Was it accidental? Was it intentional?
Very true.
And so that really, there's obviously a lot wrapped up in that, and it's hard to fully gauge that. I think at the end of the day, we know that the numbers for both suicides and overdoses are undercounted. And I would imagine the same would be true for specific populations such as veterans as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I'm just seeing if I can show this slide a little bit better. So here's the slide. I'm gonna see if I can get out of the way. So this is one side of the, this is one side of the wallet card. And let's see if I can get this in view mode, so you can see it a little bit better. So that's on one side of the wall card. Now this is literally like a 2.5 by 3.5 inch card. So it's somewhat small. And this is the part that didn't come out. So what happened is, you see, we've got these big letters, and of course it doesn't normally look like this, but it's because I'm trying to use Google Slides. But you can see here essentially. And Garrett, I'm going to send you this in a version that doesn't look like this, but you can see, if it wasn't for the big letters all over, you can see it's pretty neat and tidy, and it's got all the key information from the presentation all in one two-sided wallet card. And again, you can take a picture of this, and it can be digital.
And as a reminder, folks, we will be posting the slide deck and the recording on our website and sending it out through the couple of different listservs within the next few days, however long it takes for us to upload that. I did see a question from Amy. Are there resources that either of you would recommend to support families and other loved ones of military service members and veterans? So more for the family and loved ones, anything that immediately comes to mind?
Yeah, we have a lot of programming here that includes families. We also have a caregiver support program that is designed specifically to support family members who are supporting veterans who have significant disabilities. We have education programs, and so I would suggest anybody who is looking for that information, you can certainly contact me at the VA. My number is 518-626-5329. That's 626-5329 in the 518 area code. And that's for the Albany catchment area. If you're down south, to call some of those VAs in the lower area, and I will connect you with the individuals here. And one of the slides that we have in the presentation, we include contacts within that also for the VA, for our local VA anyway. So, I'm sorry, it's 5329. I think somebody put up 5321. Yep, that's it.
And this is Bruce. And as you think about not just families, but faith communities, serving veterans, not just the issue of suicide, but in a broader sense, one of the older books I always appreciated was called Beyond the Yellow Ribbon. And now there's some more recent books that address the issue of how can faith communities support veterans and their families. One congregation I know started out by offering a dinner for veterans once a quarter, and their feedback was so positive, they eventually went to monthly meetings. But again, variety, and churches from their own faith tradition may have resources available that talk about ways of supporting veterans as well.
It's a great reminder, literally and metaphorically, meeting people where they're at. So, yeah.
I put up some common terms also, Gara, just so these are embedded in this slide. Some of these are terms that we throw around all the time that maybe other people are not as familiar with. So I just wanted to mention that those are in the slides. And also I mentioned that we do have contacts here for those of you who may want to reach out to anyone here at our VA, some of our key points of contact for various programs.
And if folks are not necessarily from the capital region and want to know the suicide prevention coordinator in your area, you can reach out to Dr. Hunter or myself, to Reverend Swingle, and we'd be happy to connect you with those individuals.
Absolutely.
So thank you again so much for this excellent information. And we talked a lot about it and the idea of hope, and so that resonates, I think, throughout the content, throughout the information. That's what this work is all about. So thank you for the hope that you offer to the people that you come into contact with. Thank you to everyone on the call this afternoon. As soon as we get this recording, we will let folks know. And we look forward to seeing you on the next workshop. Take care, be safe, be well.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Gara.
Thank you, everyone.